Welcome to B.R.A.I.N. I'm Lance, along with other podcast co-hosts, I guess. For the last month or two, we've been kind of delving into childhood development and creating tests to evaluate development, and have been administering them to multiple age groups. We tested children from 18 months to 6 years old, and took a random sample of 6 kids from each age group.
For our little group of 6 kids, we tried to keep it pretty even for male and female. Some of the kids that we ended up giving tests to, we had to scratch from our data because we couldn't get certain things for them or they didn't participate, yada yada. The tests we gave fell into one of 3 kind of general categories or domains that people use to kind of measure development. And these are physical, psychosocial, and cognitive domains.
So everybody, we had multiple stations where we ran a few tests. Some of them were cognitive, some psychosocial, some physical. And we kind of rotated the kids around between us so they all got a chance at every test, and we could test them all relatively quickly.
Yeah, so the reason that we picked this very young age group is kind of in their first big stage of development is because the age range, we both have access to a whole lot of kids this age. They're more likely to take these tests seriously because usually they're pretty good at following instructions. We're kind of authority figures, which makes them more likely to go along with it versus teens who are just going to be like, no, we're going to rebel. There's also a very high rate of change in this group compared to like all other age ranges. Because, I mean, you guys can speak to this because we all did developmental research. But in that group of like 0 to 6, you're going to see the most change within like 2 or 3 years in terms of what they're able to do. So yeah, we each have a little bit of like a summary introduction kind of thing to each of our stations, which we'll kind of run through, and then some points from our results from that station that we can use for discussion type things.
So we're moving to, you're doing a hand motion, which doesn't work well on podcasts.
Well, you need to tell me that.
I don't want to be like closer to the mic.
So Destry, I guess you want to go first then?
Yeah. Okay. So I was in charge of a lot of them, but my main focus was sorting cubes and toys. The other ones that I did was counting up to 10, easy math, naming, like identifying 2 objects and how many for those objects. For the general method of sorting, is just being able to identify the different sizes of cubes and toys. The toys that we used was like a miniature Foxy, a Pop toy, and then a Star Wars toy, and then just, I guess, basic cubes. Don't know how big
like
they
math
are.
cubes, maybe?
Yeah.
I guess. I got them from the math room, so that's
Math
what I
cubes.
did.
The next one was easy math, and that's just basically if they're able to like add or subtract. So I did like 3 plus 4 and then 7 minus 5. Naming the objects and quantity is just basically identifying if they know what a pencil and eraser is and how many of those do we have. And then counting up to 10 is just easily counting up to 10. The scoring techniques, I gave for sorting a point if they're able, for each category, if they're able to put them in order correctly and are able to identify if it's small, medium, or large. Math, I gave a point for each equation that they solve correctly. I gave a point to each category if they're able to identify the object and the quantity. And then counting is just if they're able to count up to 10 in the correct order. Overall, so all of mine was just focusing on the cognitive domain. And with like sorting, a lot of them weren't able to like identify, like they're mostly able to identify if it was tiny or a very big, tall object. They weren't like, they would get very confused from like the medium size. But throughout the years and ages, they were able to identify all of them correctly, which is pretty cool because,
Development.
yeah. For math, we didn't really do the other three until later on because of other stuff. Like we're able to, like, I guess, do them very well. So we had to come up with different other type of stuff for different domains. So for the math from 4 to 5, 2 did not participate, but one of them were able to solve both, and then 2 were able to solve the addition one, and then the other one couldn't solve either. And I feel like the reason why they were able to solve addition is like, I guess it's kind of the wording. Because I would say, oh, what's 7 minus 5? Or can you subtract these two numbers? They wouldn't be able to understand that because that's not in their vocabulary. So I say, oh, if I have 7 of these and I take away 5, then they were able to solve that correctly.
Yeah, because like I think that's how I learn math. Like very basic, right? You have 7 things and you take away 5, you have 2.
Yeah.
Right, which now seems easier and just you can say subtraction, but like, I mean that is easier for me to understand, right? You have a pile and you take some away,
Yeah.
you still have some left, right?
But some of the language isn't introduced until later.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't know if we said this in the very beginning, so I just want to make that clear.
Yes.
But once kids were able to get like 100% success rate on one test or skill, we would swap that out for a slightly harder test of that skill that still covered the same of the 3 domains, but just more amped up for older kids. But yeah, continue.
Exactly. For naming, for the 4 to 5, that all of them were able to identify the eraser and pencil, and 2 of them didn't participate, so they all thought that was really easy. Like I had someone say, oh, this is easy. I'm like, okay, big boy, you got it. And then same with counting, both for up to 6 were able to count up to 10 easily. And like from 5 to 6, they were able to count quickly. And I was like, okay, big brains, got it.
I feel like cognitive was one of the best ones for like whenever we put the data on graphs and stuff later, because it showed, I guess, the most linear kind of improvement or like the quickest jump up between the different age groups.
Yeah, I think like a lot of that has to do with like being in school, right? So we go to school. There are also young kids who go to school.
Yeah.
And right, like learning at school, you're mostly focusing on cognitive growth. So to me, it makes sense, right, to see the positive trend because you're focusing on that, right? Like you go to school every day to learn more. So like it makes sense for me that you'd be constantly improving that, not only just as you're getting older, but like you're at school to learn that.
Yeah, so it's like not quite enforced. That sounds too mean, but like it's easier to test kids and like measure definitive progress with cognitive stuff. So there's more like benchmarks that different grades have for like the cognitive requirements you have to have.
Yeah.
Whereas they don't have like a psychosocial requirement. Like you have to be able to mimic your friend's behavior before you're allowed in 5th grade or whatever. Yeah, so I think that one's probably why that is that. Because I mean, physical is a little bit more, I guess, controllable in school because kids take PE classes, they have recess and things like that, but that's still not as like clear cut as the brain stuff.
I also have another thing for like the reason why maybe that they didn't want to participate at like the very younger ages, like 1-year-olds to 2-year-olds and stuff like that, is because it's just that they're like we're complete strangers and they need the consistency of having that same person so they're able to get used to them. Because when I was like in my interview for oral comm, I was talking to Mary Sweeney, who is the head of ECE, and during that I was interviewing to be like an assistant teacher for ECE, and she was talking about how like they need that consistency because if they weren't able to have that consistency, then they just wouldn't participate or wouldn't want to do anything.
Mhm.
So that could be the reason why they didn't want to
Yep.
participate
Mhm.
at that age.
Yeah, and that went down. Like participation rates went up a lot as we got into older groups.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, they're more open
It makes
to
sense. I mean,
open to talking to people who they don't like necessarily see every single day. Mhm. Any other thoughts on that one? Not really.
Nope.
Okay, well then.
Clara.
So in the 18-month to 2-year-old kids section, we had a bunch of problems with the 18-month-olds because the fire alarm went off.
Oh,
in
we
the
did.
middle.
Yep.
So
was a
I got a
chaotic
total of
time.
6 of 2 kids to do my stations. I had spin and clap at the same time, and I got 1 kid to do it and 1 kid not to do it. And I had object permanence, so being able to like know that an object is still there even if you don't see it for a couple of seconds.
Yep.
So I hid like a toy and then had them go find it. And both of the kids who actually participated were able to do that. And for the 2 to 3-year-olds, we kind of did the same tests, and all of the kids participated in that section. And for the spin and clap, 3 of the 6 got it and 3 didn't. And I kind of told them to do it first, and then showed them if they didn't do it after like telling them 2 times. And for the object permanence, I gave them a point if they found the toy or went to find it after like 3 times of telling them.
It makes sense that you'd have to show them, right? Like, someone who's 18 months old, spinning and clapping
Yeah.
seems really confusing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think like language barrier came up during the test quite a bit,
Mhm.
and like it's difficult to kind of judge where's the line of too much input for me. And I know, right, like I wanted to see growth, but it was hard to know, like, or to think that a kid could succeed at it, but he just didn't understand what was
Yeah.
going on.
Well, yeah, like I had a kid who I prompted to do a thing a number of times, and he was like, no. So I was like, okay, that's a fail. But then the teacher came up and she's like, oh no, you can
Yeah.
do it. Let me try. And I'm like, well, no, I can't.
yeah, it was like that with the jacket thing too.
Yeah.
Like whenever like they were like, oh no,
Yeah.
they can do it, and they use their own jacket.
Mhm.
So it's like, well, can't really use that because that's not what we're testing. You know. It's
yeah,
fine.
and the teacher was kind of the most, I guess, interfering in like that age group because she was.
Because I mean, they have to be like they're
Mhm.
like.
Yeah.
Not,
They gotta
I don't
watch
want to say
the kids more.
micromanaging,
Or they
but they
just
kind of
want
have to be
like,
on the kids 24/7
Yeah.
because I mean they're 18 months. I mean they're gonna get
You
into
can't leave them
everything.
alone.
They'll run over everyone. I mean they're a lot.
Yeah.
So like it makes sense, but you know
Mhm.
it's something we learned though along the way. Like just have to like specifically be like, hey, teachers, you can't.
Yeah, we
You
had
gotta
problems.
be out of here because
Yeah.
it's not
no
gonna
matter
work.
if you want to help them or not, you can't.
Yeah, we had a good number of interference problems. Because, like, in one of my stations, they, like, 90% of the time, whenever they made a mistake, it's because they were, like, looking at their friend or, like, talking to someone or, like,
Yeah,
just not focused because of other stuff in the room.
Mhm.
Which, you know, not ideal, but
happens.
it's how it be.
So for the 3 to 4-year-olds, I had them run in a circle around me, which Stella had before me,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I had 5 out of 6 kids participate, and all 5 got it with like a show of hands and run around me. Then I had them balance on 1 foot, and 4 out of 5 kids were able to do that. And then I had them spin and clap again, and 5 out of 6 kids got it, and we only had 5 kids participating. So
Mhm.
that went up a lot after like a year. So that was really cool to see. And then for the 4 to 5-year-olds and 5 to 6-year-olds, we had the same tests again, and that's where I took over Destry's station of sorting cubes and toys. The cubes were easy for them because we had them in different colors, and they were very like distinguishable, different sizes.
Mhm.
So the cubes were always just all of them were able to do it.
Mhm.
With the toys, we had a problem because I described it as, well, I asked the kids which one's the biggest, and our medium toy had a very big head. So and our the biggest toy or the tallest toy had a small head, so that we think got them confused a
Yeah,
bunch
just the wording.
Yeah.
of sorting. So I should have like asked for the tallest toy.
Yeah, because by, like, width
Yeah.
would not
Yeah.
have been the same kind of thing.
We had 1 kid in the 5 to 6-year-old category who actually like explained why he said that the medium one was the biggest because of the head size, so we
Yep.
gave him a point. But that was a problem that I should have worded that better. And then I had them balance and hop at the same time on one foot. And out of 5 kids, 4 were able to do that at the 4 to 5-year-old kids. And all of the 6 kids we tested in the 5 to 6-year-old station were able to do that. So physical went up a little bit from the 3 to 4 to 4 to 5-year-olds, and you could really see the cognitive point improving, which was really cool.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any other kind of thoughts on that one?
No.
Not yet. I have another like wording thing, and it's interesting to see like how small wording can change a kid's perception on things.
Yeah.
I had a big problem with that on one of my writing things.
Yeah.
Was
But maybe we touch back down on that at the end.
Yeah, because that's the thing that we all kind of saw, so we can kind of cover that a little bit in each of ours.
Yeah.
You know, spoilers, we'll get there.
Spoiler alert.
Spoilers.
Okay.
Okay, so I did.
Well, introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm Ella. Hello. But I did all the cognitive stations. And so one of my first ones was 18 months to 4, so 18 to 2, and then 3 to 4 I did. And this was identifying shapes with their color. So I showed them 4 different flashcards. Yes. One was a blue star, one was a green square, yellow circle, and red triangle. And I gave them points for getting blue or star. So if they got blue, they got a point. If they got star, they got a point. If they get both, they get 2 points. It's pretty basic scoring, but we wanted to kind of test to see if they could identify that yet. And then I organized this very poorly. So for the identifying shapes and colors, it actually went really well, surprisingly, for like the 18 to 2. I was expecting it to like no one knew anything, but I was really surprised. So like my highest score I got was 7 points.
Nice.
My lowest was 0, which was like pretty surprising. But I did have like, it was only one kid who got 7. Most of them got 0, maybe 1. So it was just like this one kid who like kind of excelled at that. And then three of the kids just couldn't say any of them, which was like, again, expected. It's 18 to 2, so it wasn't anything like crazy surprising. But then my like 2 to 3, 3 to 4, I started seeing like definite growth, which is what I liked about cognitive. Like you could see definite change and improvement in each category you did. So my 2 to 3, I had highest score of 8, lowest 4, so it's already like boom, at least everyone knew at least something, which was really good. And then but most of the children got almost all of them, so 7 to 8 points. 8 was the total they could get. And then 3 to 4, they all got it. So at like that point, I was like, okay, we can take this off. Like they're like again, I had the thing you did where like this is easy. I do this all the time. So I was like backing up. Okay, my bad. Sorry about that. And then I had so sorting daily events. This one was really hard because it like there was a lot happening on the card. I think I needed to keep it a lot simpler than I had it. So I had a picture of the activity and then like just saying wake up, go to school, bedtime. So I was like testing to see if they knew time basically, because I mean obviously you're 18 months old, you can't read a clock. So like
just sequencing.
it was really hard to like try and figure out how we were going to be able to do that. We're like, okay, they know these events, like 3 major events that happen in their day. One thing that could have also been a problem is bedtime, like sleeping. They nap a lot because they're 18 months old.
Yeah.
Like, so like they could also have confused that, which I get. And yeah, so the cards also was on my bad because I think they can't read. They're 18, like again, they're young. So I feel like the words might have confused them more. So I probably just should have like stick to a picture and then me verbally explaining the activity might have helped a lot more, but you know, I wanted to see like where they were, but that's fine. And then I gave them a point for putting the card in the correct order. Like simple as that, you know, 1 point for getting 1 right, and then so this one was the one that I saw the most like struggle with. So in the 18 to 2, no one got any, which was kind of what I was expecting, because as soon as I got in there, I kind of forgot how young 18-month-olds were. Like, you forget how tiny they are. And I walk in, I'm like, oh, no one's going to be able to do this. Like, this is not going to go over very well for me. So no one got any correct for the 18 to 12, or nope, 18 to 2. And then 2 to 3, I started seeing some definite, like, improvement. So one kid got 3, but the lowest was 0 still. Majority got 0. There were 2 kids who scored points. One of them got a 3, and then the other got a 1. So, like, again, but seeing improvement. And then the 3 to 4, majority got 3 points. It was out of like the 4 kids got at least points.
Yeah.
And only 1 child got 0. So like even though not all the kids could complete it by the end, like I was like, yeah, I think there's enough improvement within this to where we can just like move on.
Yeah.
And then I did my spelling. So this one got kind of confusing for some kids because I verbalize the words, because you can't show them because at that age they're starting to be able to understand reading and like letters.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna tell them. So that could have been kind of difficult, but it's fine. And then each word I had going up in difficulty, so I showed them or told them 3 words: dog, bike, school. I mean, school was the hardest, obviously. We tried to make that one challenge and like purposely trick them up because it has that like little tricky CH in there.
Did you put any pictures with these, or was it just you
No,
saying
it
the
was
word?
just me saying it.
Okay.
So that was a thing that I thought about later was like they had no like, verbal cue. They had no like visual cue of what this was. So that might have been like a struggle point, but
Yeah.
So they got a point for every letter they got correct. I wasn't like I was gonna do it in the order, but I was like, if, as long as they're like sounding out the word, they can tell that this letter's in there. I gave them a point for it because spelling, especially at that age, is like it's kind of hard.
Yeah.
And then I only gave them full points if they could correctly spell it and in the right order. So for this one, so I did, I don't think I said this, I did 4 to 5 and then 5 to 6. So this was our older range of kids. So in the 4 to 5, I only 1 child scored, but they scored really well. They got 5 points, and then the rest got 0. So either they didn't, I said the word and they tried and they couldn't spell it, or I said the word and they were like, no. Like I had a couple kids just be like, I can't do that, and I was like, you want to try? And they're like, I don't. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So that happened a couple times, but And then my 5 to 6, I had my highest score of a 12, and then my lowest of a 5. So everyone scored points, which was like what I was hoping for with this age.
Yep.
Again, with cognitive, like it's what I like about it is like you see definite improvement. Like some of this is so hard to like calculate, like being social.
Yeah.
Like it's so hard to put a number to that because you're like, oh, you talked 3 times, But like that could be so different with another person.
Yeah.
So it's just like a really hard thing to analyze. So then the last one I did was sounding out words. So this was the one. This was also 4, 5, 6, or 4, 5, 5, 6. So this one was the one that I didn't get, again, no like drawings or anything. This was just me writing out the word on a note card in different colors so I didn't get them confused. I don't know, I thought it might help. But no like pictures of what the item was. One thing I did notice, which I kind of, I put frog twice, is that when I was spelling frog, it's just like the way my handwriting is. I do not a cursive G, but it's kind of
Like the tail loops.
yeah.
back
I
around.
loop back,
Yep.
and one of them looked at it and said like I can't read cursive, and I'm like, that's
Well, they're able to identify.
I know, but I was
cursive.
like, oh, you
Yeah.
can like identify that's a thing, which was really cool.
So,
Yeah, and I did lamps.
I don't know what your word was.
I did hat, frog, and bike. So
Okay.
again, kind of like the other one, I went up in difficulty, or I tried to try and trip them up more. And then yeah, I only gave them a point if they sounded out correctly. This one was more binary of like either you know it or you don't kind of thing. So that made it a lot easier. So my 4 to 5, only 1 child got 1 point. So my highest was 1 point. And then my lowest was 0, which was again kind of what I was expecting for. Like I wanted them to mess up. Like that's what I was wanting.
Yep.
So it was good. And then my 5 to 6, only 1 child didn't get all 3 correct, which was really good. Most got like 2 to 3 points. So again, same thing with all the others. Every single category I had like clear like distinction with age and like capability, which was really cool. Yeah. Anyway, it's mine. So,
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I mean, like for me, it's interesting to see how the fine details can really affect things, and how open development is.
Yeah.
Right? Like spelling and not knowing what a cursive G looks like, even though you know it's cursive, it's hard to test that level of development.
Yeah.
There's so many outside factors, which is some of the things that I ran into that made it more complicated. So I had mostly, I think, psychosocial tests. For the younger kids, we kind of didn't focus on that. So we started with ball throws to test physical strength. They were just asked to throw a ball, and if it was in arm's distance, a rough arm's distance, I gave them a point. So just testing motor skills and arm coordination. We'll skip the next one. A little bit later, I only had 4 tests, which was strange, but they carried on for a long time. So one of the tests that was really interesting to me, we asked them to wear a vest, just a jacket without sleeves from the costume closet, and we scored it out of 1. I counted it as a point if they were able to put their armholes through the sleeve and wear it like a vest. And I'm not sure if you guys have any, but I think this is the only... No, we have one more that's been done the whole time. Just your drawing, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I think nobody else. So it was interesting to see how people developed in putting on the jacket. So some of the younger kids, up until they were about 5 years old, they weren't able to put on the jacket at all. And then as time continued, we saw more consistent successes within the test.
The jacket was also weird because we
Yes.
picked the jacket to try and make it easier to wear because they didn't need to like put their head through a head hole or anything. It was just like you slip it on, you slip it off, no problem.
Yep.
But that was actually more confusing to a couple of the kids, I think, than
Yep.
just like a shirt.
I think their teachers taught them to put the head hole towards them
Mhm.
and then slip it on from there. So without that frame of reference, it was challenging. So until you got to the later stages of development, it was really difficult to see improvement because a lot of people scored zeros on it because they either didn't want to try or didn't know how.
So we might change the garment if we did it again.
Another interesting one, kind of to test preferences, was we basically had them dress a doll. So we had them pick their favorite out of 3 colors and then out of 3 items of clothing. Every time that they matched, so we asked them again at the end after they picked a color and a clothing, we asked them out of kind of a matrix of, so if they picked blue and then pants, if they picked blue pants on the second half of the sheet, then they got a point per match.
Yeah, because this one was supposed to be trying to measure like favorites and preferences because you start to get like the development of that at that age, which is a hard thing to test, but that's kind of the best method we came up with.
So it's interesting in this test in particular, there were fine details that I think really influenced it. The doll that we had drawn was as nondescript as you can, just a blob person at best. But I said the first time, whenever I was running the test, which one would he like to wear the most? So indicating a gender in this nondescript man. So it wasn't planned for, but I tried to keep it standard as we went from 18 months to 6 years old. It was interesting to see how that affected it. One child who was in the 5 to 6 year old group had clear preferences at the beginning and picked green pants, I think. And then when we turned the sheet over and I said which one would he like the most out of these options, he picked a blue dress because he thought it would be funny, which didn't match with his preferences, but the gender he clearly put on bias on what he picked.
Yeah, an expectation.
Which was interesting to see. It was really difficult to isolate one variable in each of the tests, and it was cool to see how, like, at a later age, gender identity picked and influenced choices, which isn't something that we were trying to test for, but something that I kind of noticed in this test.
And it shows a sense of humor, which was something we were gonna test, but like didn't
It's so
really
hard to
have a plan
test.
for, because that's not.
It's so subjective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't really. So yeah, points there, I guess.
Yep, and it was interesting to. I didn't award the points for this test because he didn't match his preferences,
Mhm.
even though he clearly demonstrated preferences at the beginning.
Yeah.
So things like this were difficult to test as time went on, especially as the test got more complicated. So another, speaking of complicated tests, there was a test that I did called the incomplete drawing test, where they were shown a shape. We can probably put this on
Yeah, we can
after
put that on
in
there.
post. Yeah. So they were shown a shape and were asked to make a drawing and give it a title, or if they didn't understand the word title, give it a name. There was no maximum score because this test was more varying, but we scored it per object. So if they drew a picture of a cat with cat ears, counted 1 point for the cat ears, 1 point for the head, 1 point if for the tail if they drew it.
Yeah, and this isn't just like a thing we came up with. It's like an actual test that
Yep.
people pay for and like administer in school to evaluate this stuff. So
I didn't have the money to get the test,
yeah,
so
but like there's a ground
there
for
is
this.
a ground base for the test.
Look it up.
So whenever the drawings became understandable, they gained a point for falling outside of the normal pattern. So if everybody used the object to draw ears, people who didn't use the object gained a point.
Mhm.
So the differences between, I only did this test between 4 to 5-year-olds and 5 to 6-year-olds.
Mhm.
And even within this year, I think I saw the biggest growth between participants. Whenever I tested the 4 to 5-year-olds, everything ended up as a scribble. They connected the points to their lines and made a shape, but it was random and spread out. In the 5 to 6, the scribbles turned into organized thoughts, and it was interesting to see the differences in random picking to legitimate cognitive thought. So turning a shape into cat ears is much different than turning a shape into a scribble.
Yeah.
It was
Mhm.
interesting to see this large difference because I think, at least for me, I didn't see any within your tests. Like between one group to the next, it was very, very obvious to see the difference,
Yeah, for the most part.
I think. There's not too much else. It was the 4 to 5-year-old gap between 4 to 5 and 5 to 6 was probably the biggest growth that I saw. But other than that, I don't really have many things.
Yeah, so I mean that leads kind of into mine. I did a drawing test where I just gave them a blank piece of printer paper. They got 7 colored pencils, and I basically asked them to draw a picture of a dog and a picture of a house. If the kid ever like stopped drawing because they got distracted or they looked away or didn't seem like they were focusing, I would just say the same prompt again. I don't think I ever prompted more than 5 times for any one kid. If they just like gave up and weren't interested, I just called it a day, said, okay, you're free. Every kid that we tested for all the ages got this test. This one was interesting. I can put up some examples on screen in post, so it'll be hard for me to kind of talk about it without those. But in the beginning, it was usually they would use one color, kind of just whatever color was closest, wasn't very well thought out. They would just do a scribble. Only one of them in the earliest group got something that was vaguely face-like. But for the most part, it was just like a squiggle, maybe 2 colors tops. One kid just wrote the alphabet over and over, which, good on him for knowing the alphabet, but didn't mean what we wanted. Yeah, and so that was kind of the earlier groups. There were a couple kids who were no participant, but I feel like my group had less of those, because kids are usually like, oh, drawing, that's so much fun, I want to go do drawing. Yeah, and then, for scoring, I would look at it, and at first, I would just kind of give them a grade on if there are 2 shapes at all for the younger groups, because they're not going to draw a recognizable dog and house. And then, as we got into older groups, everyone got 100% of the time got 2 shapes. Then I started checking to see if it was a dog or a house. I would also ask them to self-identify stuff, so if they drew like a funny little face thing, I'd be like, hey, what's that? And if they're like, it's a ghost, then I wouldn't give them the point for drawing dog. Because
There were a lot of ghosts.
There were a lot of ghosts. Ghosts are very popular. Yeah, so for a dog, it just needs to have like legs or limbs, a face of some kind, and they need to say it's a dog. For the house, if it's got walls, any kind of like roof-ish shape, and then an opening of like window or door, then I would count that as a success. My other ones were also physical. They're not as in-depth. I did one that was just run in a circle, which Clara later got. That was for the kids who are earlier than 3 to 4 age range. I just kind of stood in a clear area of the room, kind of gestured with my arms. I was like, hey, can you run in a circle around me? I would ask 3 times, and then yes or no, pass, fail kind of situation. And then for 4, 5, and 6, I did a fine motor skill one again. This was one where we printed out straight lines on a piece of paper. I'd hand it to the kid and ask them to cut along 2 of the lines and just kind of keep that straight line going. For that one, I marked it as a failure if they deviated from the line at more than 4 points, like majorly.
Mhm.
For a deviation, if it was like as off from the line as that line was wide, if that makes sense. So if the line was like whatever, 1 millimeter wide, if they were off by like a full millimeter, then I would mark that as 1 like deviation. Or if they're just like cut in the wrong direction. And that was pretty linear. That one, yeah, pretty much just got better as ages went up. That one could have been in the cognitive with like the success rate it showed pretty much. And then yeah, for the dog and house, pretty much you'd say you'd have to look at those. So I'll put some of those up on screen, and we should have a link to the full photo album. And each one is numbered with the number of the kid who drew them. So yeah, if you got any questions or things about kind of my stations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the ones that we did for the whole time, the drawing, the house, and the dog, I think in that category, it's really clear. It's really clear to see the differences between younger kids and older kids, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily younger and older, but less developed and more developed.
It was also interesting because whenever they got older, kind of the layout, I guess, or composition of the paper that they chose got more and more regular.
Mm-hmm.
So like at a young age, they would just kind of pick a direction, pick a color, just whoop, 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 scribble, done. And then it kind of slowly started to even out. So most kids would pick a landscape orientation. Most kids put the house dead center, put the dog to the left, usually facing like the viewer.
Mhm.
Interesting.
A lot of them also put like one little tree next to the dog. So I thought it was interesting that like a bunch of the kids' images started looking more like each other's as they kind of got older. And I don't really have an explanation for that, but you know.
Imitation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fun fact. There you go.
Did you do the test with 2 kids sitting at the table at the same time?
Yeah, but they never really they didn't like
Worked
interact with
together.
each other. No.
Mhm.
Because I just kind of put them at each other's table. If they talked to each other, it was just like, can I have red?
Yeah.
And it was like, yes, give him red.
Because I think that happened to me with Dress the Doll. Even though I wasn't actively working with a kid, they were watching the other kid's preferences.
Yeah, I think there was
Yeah.
one time the kid drew a tree and another kid saw him draw a tree, and then that kid later drew a tree.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, we didn't have like perfect isolation for these. Kind of wish we did, but didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
Yeah. So if we did it again with that, I would be interested to see how much of that trend there still was. So yeah.
I think the biggest thing about this is seeing the growth in the cognitive domain in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is clear positive trend. The person who was the second oldest scored the most points, and the kid who was the youngest scored the least.
Mm-hmm.
And the trend matches this. Maybe we can put it up, maybe not.
We probably can. Yeah. So if we managed it, there's some graphs.
And I'm looking at the graphs right now, but cognitive is the most clear. Psychosocial is pretty positive, and physical is all over the place.
And there's
Yeah.
a pretty clear jump in cognitive, I want to say.
Mhm.
So once you hit like probably 5-ish, it like jumps up a lot.
Yeah.
Is 5 kindergarten? No. Yes.
I don't know.
Beginning.
5, I think, is entering into kindergarten.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Which, I mean, that would make sense to me. As in organized schooling, you would be going to school to officially learn instead of a
Like daycare.
daycare.
Yeah.
Which could be the reason for it, could not be. That's the hard part with a lot of these types of tests, is when you're trying to figure out why, it might be, it also might not be.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of factors that go into it, especially the jacket. One kid said it was too small. I think he had the jacket twisted up, and he looked knowledgeable on how to do it, but it's difficult to not give points or to give points whenever because it becomes so subjective. So we all had to stick to our tests and our scoring criteria.
Even with like not participation, even with I don't know, the irregularities and interruptions and stuff we still got like decent data. It still shows trends pretty clearly. It still shows a lot of the development I think we were looking for. So yeah, I'm not too upset with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone got finishing thoughts? Not really.
Nope.
All right. Well, feed.
Feed.